Welcome to Time of Death. This video is for informational purposes and in no way meant to glorify or condone violence. In today's video, we'll be discussing the murder of Juan Jose Leon Rios. Leon was shot and killed on Thursday, May 6, 2021, in the 200 block of East 29th Street in historic South Central, according to LA County coroner records. Jose Angel Nunez was subsequently arrested and charged with the murder. The following is the evidence at trial. On May 6, 2021, defendant Nunez and his girlfriend took a train from their home in San Bernardino to Los Angeles. Victim Leon picked them up and drove them to another location where defendant had left his white Porsche SUV. Defendant and his girlfriend drove back to the victim's home in the SUV, arriving at 5:30 p.m. According to defendant's girlfriend, defendant and the victim were friends and they smoked weed and wax together that afternoon. There was a gun on the victim's table and she saw the victim playing with it or handling it. Around 6:50 p.m., the three went out to get food, returning about 20 minutes later. Later that evening, a neighbor was sitting in the driver's seat of his van, which was parked on the street outside the victim's home, when defendant left the house and walked towards his white SUV. The SUV was double parked on the street next to the neighbor's van, and defendant asked the neighbor if the SUV was in his way. The neighbor said it was not. Defendant opened the door to his SUV, took out an object, and then went back inside. The neighbor was not paying close attention and did not see what the object was. Soon afterward, defendant's girlfriend was in the restroom and heard defendant and the victim arguing. She was really high at the time and was not paying attention to the conversation, so she didn't remember what they were arguing about. She acknowledged telling police that defendant and the victim always fight, but she didn't believe the fights were serious. As she was walking out of the bathroom, she heard a loud noise like a gunshot. She saw the victim's body lying on the floor. Defendant ran out the door and she followed. The neighbor was still sitting in his van outside the house as these events took place. He heard the gunshot and saw defendant and his girlfriend run out the house. She was unable to open the door of the SUV until defendant helped open it. Defendant then walked towards the neighbor and said in Spanish, "You didn't see anything." Defendant had a black semi-automatic pistol in his hand, and although he didn't point it at the neighbor, he made it known that he had a weapon by making a motion with it. The neighbor interpreted the statement as a clear threat to his life. The neighbor testified that between 5 and 10 minutes passed from the time defendant first went out to the car until he heard the gunshot. Timestamps on surveillance videos from a nearby home indicated that the first encounter between defendant and the neighbor took place at 7:57 p.m. and that defendant came out the house after the shooting at 8:03 p.m. After defendant drove away, the neighbor called 911. Police officers arrived at the scene and found the victim lying face down and unresponsive on the floor of the living room with a pool of blood around his head. They also found a single 9mm casing on the floor. A medical examiner determined that the victim died of a single gunshot to the head fired from an indeterminate range. The bullet struck the victim on the right posterior side of his head, traveled upward toward the front and to the left, and exited the left posterior side. Detectives recovered the victim's cell phone and were able to extract some data from it, including a video showing the victim's table with 2 firearms on it. Metadata from the video showed a timestamp of 6:45 p.m. on May 6, 2021, about an hour before the shooting. A detective testified that the video had most likely been created at the time indicated by the timestamp. Defendant testified in his own defense. He stated that he and the victim were friends and hung out 3 or 4 times a week. According to defendant, when he arrived at the victim's house, he saw one of the 2 guns from the victim's cell phone video sitting on his table. Then defendant picked up the gun from the victim's table while the victim was digging through a drawer looking for something. Defendant testified that he picked up the gun because it intrigued him. It looked nice. At first, defendant was holding the gun in his open palms. Then he tried to grab it with one hand. His finger inadvertently went into the trigger well and the gun went off. Defendant testified that he did not call 911 because he was scared and really didn't know what to do. He had incidents with officers in the past and was afraid they would not believe him if he told them that the shooting was an accident. The people charged defendant with 1 count of first-degree murder and 1 count of dissuading a witness by force or threat. The court instructed the jury on first and second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and excusable accidental homicide, but not voluntary manslaughter. Following the trial, the jury found defendant guilty on both counts and found that he personally used a firearm in the commission of both offenses. The court sentenced defendant to a term of 32 years to life in prison. Juan Jose Leon Rios was 22 years old at the time of death.